Howdy, Ags. Welcome to Aggie Growth Hacks, the podcast sponsored by the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship at Texas A&M. And we're dedicated to helping entrepreneurs improve their business, connect with other Aggie entrepreneurs, and support one another. I'm your host, Greg Martin, Fighting Texas Aggie class of 2001.
And I'm your co-host, Chris Hunter, Fighting Texas Aggie class of 1998. Whoop!
Well, we got a little story for you, Ags. We just wrapped up celebrating the Aggie 100 winners of 2024. And let me tell you, it was something special. It was the best celebration yet. And not only did this class represent a whopping $5.7 billion with a B in collective revenue and spanned over 50 class years from the class of 1969 to the class of 2019, but it was the 20th anniversary of the Aggie 100 celebration. If you followed Aggie Growth Hacks at all, you know that we have a tradition, we are Aggies after all, of recording 4 in-person episodes on Aggie 100 Day. We figured that Zoom is great, but since they're in town to celebrate, let's sit down and learn from fellow Ags who are leading fast-growing companies. Because of that, we're going to change up the program schedule just a little bit over the next 2 months. These 4 in-person conversations were so impactful that we threw away the time clock and just kept the conversation rolling. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to split each conversation up into 2 parts with a new episode dropping every week for the next 8 weeks. Let's kick this party off by talking with George Voneiff and Mike Gatens, whose company MGV Energy Inc. was the fastest growing Aggie-owned and operating company way back in the very first Aggie 100 celebration.
So pass it back and listen up to Mike and George as they share some really good bull.
All right. Well, George and Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Aggie Growth Hacks. We are excited to have you and really to be able to celebrate Aggie 100 Day. This is probably one of our favorite days of the year, but really to go back and to celebrate and realize that you gentlemen were in the very first Aggie 100. You were the fastest growing Aggie-owned company. So thank you for joining with us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and talking about entrepreneurship.
Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks.
Well, let's go back to that day many years ago. I mean, so tell us a little bit about the company that won the fastest growing Aggie 100 for the first time. Tell us, a little bit about your entrepreneur journey and kind of how you've got to walk through that.
Well, we worked together for a consulting company that was based here in College Station, run by former professor Steve Holditch. And George and I met when we were working there, and I was at the time working in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania office running that. George, when he came back to grad school, he developed a technology called moving domain that was a real key technology for a lot of applications that a lot of our clients had. And so I got him up there working for a lot of my Eastern U.S. clients, and we saw a lot of opportunity for that technology. And as time evolved, we also saw our parent company, Holditch & Associates, was clearly on a path to being sold to Schlumberger. And George and I decided, why don't we take this technology he's developed, and we also had developed a lot of business contacts throughout our experience, and especially in Canada. I was on the board of the Society of Petroleum Engineers and met a lot of Canadian leaders, and we identified tremendous opportunities for George's technology in Canada. So when Schlumberger bought Holditch & Associates, we chose not to stay, but we packed our bags and went to Calgary. And we started our business, MGV Energy. Actually, the name for that, we were at a restaurant in Banff.
The Grizzly House.
And we had all these clever names we were trying, and we never could find one that was available. So we ended up using our initials. So MGV Energy, how clever is that? Here we are. And so we decided to do that in April and May of 1997. And in September, we both came into the country the same day. I drove across the border. George and his family flew in, and we started things up. And George is crazy. George had a 3-year-old.
That's a prerequisite. You were crazy.
Wow. When we did this, he quit his job.
Wow.
Moved to Canada with a 3-year-old, 2-year-old, newborn, and 2 cats.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it was a lot of fun getting started.
I have a loving wife.
She was our accountant.
Yeah, she was.
Well, and a lot of faith goes along with that as well.
But it worked out really well. I think, George had this technology worked great for a company called Pan Canadian. They have the biggest land base of any oil and gas company in Canada. They were the spinoff of the old Canadian Pacific Railway. So they had all these land grants, and they had a bunch of these shallow gas wells that was a big part of their asset base. And they were having a hard time figuring how to optimize the development. Well, George's technology was perfect for that and worked like a charm. And so we developed a joint venture with those guys that really was the catalyst for getting us on our feet.
So you developed that while you were in school, or?
Really it had started in my first job out of school. And then later I went to work for Holditch and Associates, kind of did more of it there. And when we left, one of our big challenges was we had to get permission from Schlumberger to use this, because technically Holditch and Associates owned it. I was an employee of theirs when they did it. Since we were not going in the consulting business, we weren't going to be a competitor to theirs. They were okay with it. And so we had, when you do something like that, those are the kind of things you have to sort out. The last thing you want to do is end up in a lawsuit with a great big company that you've stolen their technology.
Especially after you've developed it and proved it. It's like, oh no, this thing's really valuable.
Yeah. And they ran with it. I think they actually patented the name moving domain or trademarked it when they got through. And, it was one of what you find out is, hey, I've got this neat technology. I'm just going to do great in business. And you find out there's about 18 other things that you have to be good at to be successful in business. It's a very humbling experience in that. So things like accounting and payroll and marketing. And,
all things you love, right?
Yes. Yes.
All those things. And, I think it's really, I've been a very entrepreneurial person my entire life. And I actually had a plant rental business when I was a kid. They got picked up by the Dallas Morning News. I grew up in Dallas. And then the Associated Press picked it up. And I had articles run all over the nation. And it was weird. I started getting letters from people. I'm 10 years old. I started getting letters from people all over the country. And I know my mom was going through and doing the triage work on these letters. And I can't imagine the letters she didn't show me. Because some of these were people that, I've got this plant that's sick, and it's some plant I've never heard of. And if it dies, I'm going to commit suicide. Seriously.
Whoa.
Things like that. What do I do?
Wow.
And it was just kind of weird. But having said that, I've always been very entrepreneurial. I will say I did not do much with that. And it's funny, I talk to a lot of students since I teach. They ask me questions. And a lot of them just want to know, I'm thinking about starting my own business. And all they need is a mentor, a sounding board. And, for me, even though I was very entrepreneurial, I wasn't ready to go do this till I was about 30, 35 years old. And it was kind of interesting. I'm not sure what twigged that in me. I went from being very entrepreneurial to, okay, I got a job, and then back to the entrepreneurial part again. But one thing that also really helped was Mike and I think ideologically are very similar. It was a much easier process having a business partner like Mike than trying to do this on my own. And, we have different personalities in many ways, but when it comes to how we think about manpower and integrity and all those things in our decision making, we probably couldn't be more closely aligned on that. And that was a big, big part of this. And then the other thing I want to mention is, so I've got a 2-month-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-year-old moving in a foreign country. We don't really know anybody. And Mike was not married. And so right off the bat, he goes, you know what? You go home every day at 5:00. I'll take care of all the evening business, social functions, and all this stuff. And then we would, Joan and I would have Mike come over once a week. And so we could have a date night and go out. And so he'd watch the 3 little kids. And
that's a great partnership.
Yeah.
3 sets of diapers. I was new to this. I did not know what I was getting into.
And one funny story, so we moved in September. The following February is our anniversary. And Mike said, hey, why don't you guys just take a weekend for your anniversary and go up to the mountains? And we're like, wow, this is fantastic. And we had found another superstar babysitter that would watch the kids, and everything normally. So we arranged for her to come over once or twice, I think, during the weekend. My wife is a detailed nut, so she had all these instructions written out for every minute of every day of what to do for Mike. We were gone Friday noon to Monday noon. When he came back, Mike answers the door. He's got the littlest one. It looks like he hasn't bathed, showered, or changed clothes the entire weekend. Yeah. There's a broken window pane in one of the doors on the inside of the house. And he goes, everybody's fine. Everybody's okay. I'm going home.
Uncle Mike's had enough.
Well, and that broken pane of glass, it happened when one of the kids pulled something and it crashed into it, and their eyes got big when it happened. I didn't think that much of it.
Yeah.
But when George and Joan got home and walked through the door, one of the first things out of all the kids' mouth, Mr. Gatens did it. Mr. Gatens did it. They ratted me out.
Yeah.
Oh, they're so cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. But George touched on something, and I saw it in some of the information that you guys provided. This Aggie credo thing.
Yeah.
I won't lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. That was a big deal and is a big deal for us. And in business, we saw a lot of bad things, and we sometimes chose not to do deals, not to enter into business arrangements. We had a number of very tough business decisions we had to make where we just saw bad behavior, things that were either illegal, immoral, or just not right. And I think after a while, people got to know that about us. And we also weren't ones to keep negotiating. You know, once we got to where we had a deal and we shook hands, that's a deal.
Yeah.
We don't retrade it. We don't expect you to retrade it. And people got to know that about us. And there were times we turned down some opportunities just because we didn't like the moral fabric of the way things evolved. And I think that in the long run, it's been a good thing for us. But,
Y'all could sleep
but
at
we
night.
certainly missed on some opportunities.
So why Canada? Why? Like, you've got all of Texas here, right?
You were in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. And I think it's largely because of the opportunity we saw when we were still at Holditch. We went up and done some projects, and we tried to get Holditch to think about opening an office there. And it turns out it just didn't make sense because the market in Canada for consulting, they couldn't charge enough. So we could go up there and be wildly successful in projects, but the engineers would be getting paid less than they would if they worked on a project in Pennsylvania or Europe or Texas or South America, where George was doing a lot of work. So what we decided, the consulting thing doesn't make sense, but this technology works so well, let's just do it for ourselves. Let's cross over to the dark side, and instead of being employees, consultants, let's be the owner. And the catalyst was the Pan-Canadian deal.
Well, one of the other aspects too was a lot of my experience base and a lot of places where you're using this tool for clients were in natural gas wells. And Canada had a problem of a limited amount of natural gas export pipelines. So on top of the whole fabric of the industry, natural gas prices in Canada had been depressed for decades.
Just because the infrastructure wasn't there to push it out?
And it still exists today. And at the time, there was just a complete price differential between the two, which had thwarted development of natural gas assets in Canada. And so a lot of the technology we had was looking for how can I drill more wells effectively in known plays. Well, in Texas, they were just more drilled up. In Canada, you do the same analysis. And you're like, wow, for every one well, I can drill one well in the States. I can drill 10 wells in Canada. And so there was a lot more upside with that. And the industry was building a brand new pipeline that was going to be coming on stream in about the next year that in theory was going to alleviate some of that price differential. So there was a little bit of strategy in there as well. We came really close to doing our company in the United States, funded by Enron Capital and Trade, and decided at the very late hour to not do that, mainly because Canada we thought was greener pastures for what we were going to do than in the U.S.
So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, okay, I understand your operations were in Canada. Were all the personnel, did you establish a Canadian business? Were all your employees Canadian? So you had to learn a whole new,
learn to speak Canadian,
benefits, all that, different society, all that stuff.
Yes and no. I mean, our first Canadian hire was a young lady who just graduated from one of their little technical colleges, and she came to work for us. And our other first hire was George's right-hand man in our consulting company. It was a guy who became our VP of everything. And his name's Brown Howard. He lives here in town now too. And Brown came up and joined us. But once we had that base, then we added largely Canadian employees, and we had to learn about Canadian hiring practices and holidays, and it was different. Certainly one thing we learned in Calgary, you don't try to get any business done in the month of August because everybody takes holiday.
No kidding.
And we made the mistake of trying to close a big deal one time in August and had a heck of a time. Couldn't find lawyers, couldn't find accountants.
Wow.
Everybody was gone.
Yeah.
Well, even our original deal with Pan-Canadian, we didn't have officially signed and closed as we were selling our houses and getting ready to move. And unbeknownst to us, ignorance is bliss, right?
You literally were building the airplane on the way off the cliff.
and because it was a big enough deal for Pan Canadian, they had to get their CEO approval on it. And Stampede starts in early July. And like Europe, everybody takes at least 6 weeks of vacation. And as soon as Stampede is over, which is Mardi Gras and cowboy boots, it lasts for about 10 days. July and August, all the decision makers are gone. And if you have a big deal that needs to get done, problem. So we now know that.
Yeah.
But it didn't stop us from doing what we were doing, at the time. We were, I think, blissfully ignorant as to the many pitfalls we might experience. And I will say, I think we both deep down knew if this didn't work out, we were going to have enough opportunity in our life professionally, we could recover from it if we had to. You don't ever want that as we don't really have a safety net, but, neither one of us drew a salary for the first, 9 months. I think you went a year without. I had little kids. We had some savings. So when we got to our first deal, and our goal was to then, buy oil and gas leases, start drilling wells. Well, we get to our first deal and we need $3.5 million. And I'm looking at Mike and Mike's looking at me, and I got a couple hundred in the bank, and then you had to go out and start finding money. And I really think most people who have never started a business that need to go out and raise funds have no idea what they're about to get into in that. And everybody thinks raising money is going to be easy until you try to go do it.
You
and
just go on a Shark Tank and then you say some words. They give you a check and you go home. What's the big deal?
And I think that's probably where most startup entrepreneurial companies fail. They get to where they got a great idea and they're trying to implement it and they run out of money. And they just can't make that happen.
You got to have capital. And once you do, life's a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
And we actually were fortunate that in our initial project where we needed a lot of capital, there was one of our former consulting clients who ran a company out of Michigan, and their primary assets were depleting and they were looking for new opportunities. So we showed them what we were doing in Canada, and they decided to back us. And then later they acquired us, and we merged into their company. But it was a good thing we found those guys, and they were interested because we were very inexperienced at raising capital, and we're not having a lot of luck in the Canadian sources that we were going after. In fact, it's interesting. George brought up this when we came up there. We didn't realize just how weak our deal was with Pan Canadian until we got there. We're talking to people that have fancy titles, but we found out that despite their assurances, we didn't have that official approval at the president and the board level, which we needed to have. And if things had turned sideways, that'd have been a problem. But both of us, and we had lots of conversations before we decided to do this, but this thing about the fallback, one thing we used to say is, the worst thing that would happen is we just go back and get a job like the one we had. Because we were both good, solid, expert petroleum engineers. I mean, there was a market for our skills as an employee or as a consultant. But this was the way we would prefer to take our careers, switching from technical expert to business owner. But there was definitely the awareness that, this is not guaranteed to work. And I frankly think we just sort of looked through that and just figured out that won't happen. Let's just keep going. But I do think it was a little scary, especially when, you land at the airport and here he comes with cats, kids and all that. And I was like, this is not a trivial thing.
Yeah. I'd gone up the week before and bought a used SUV, went and parked it at the airport, flew back, got my family and the cats, and came back up, then went to the parking garage, 5 days later and go get that SUV and, drive into a house we're renting, and yeah, it was, I think my wife, it's funny, my kids, now that they're adults, they now realize what we had done and they just go, you guys are crazy.
Yeah.
There's no way we would ever
the guts that you guys have. It's like, and they say that with a little bit of awe or something, or they should, if they're entrepreneurs.
And at the time, it didn't seem that bad. I don't know, again, ignorance is bliss. I was going to say, one of the things that's interesting in running a business, we had finally landed a very, very large joint venture with Pan Canadian, had a 50 well drilling commitment. And this is a make or break deal. So this is either going to turn into a fantastic deal home run or it's going to bankrupt us. And we drilled the first 2 wells. we're testing these wells out of coals thinking they're going to make natural gas. So we, as being experts in that field, we have to test that formation and see if it's going to move fluids and all this stuff. So we drill these wells, we pump liquid into the water to try to measure the capacity to flow things in these formations, and they don't flow anything. Like, they are dead.
Uh-oh.
And we're going, uh-oh.
This is not good.
This is not good. Yeah. And it turns out this formation is just horrible with water. You pump water into it and it just locks it up and nothing will flow through it. Oh, you pump nitrogen into it, you've got success. But there was a several month period where we were trying to go, okay, how do we know that how do we fix this? How do we not find this problem? And it turned out to be just a bunch of weird, unusual geologic situations on top of each other that we had never encountered before. I don't think anybody really had.
Well, in Appalachian, what we ended up doing was using an Appalachian solution. There was some shallow shales in Ohio where they'd had a problem like this. And that's one of the first places they start doing these, what they call nitrogen fracs, where you just pump nitrogen at high pressure, breaks the rock down, but it's all gas, the nitrogen, no proppant. So a lot of the traditional petroleum engineers like us thought, well, that's the stupidest thing we ever heard of.
Yeah.
And I remember with our clients in Ohio, we would do that and it worked. We didn't understand why it worked, but it worked. Well, so we're up there, we're having this problem in Canada. We said, let's give it a go with nitrogen. Let's try it. And the equipment didn't even exist up there to pump those kind of treatments. So we had to work with the service companies to modify some equipment. We pumped those treatments on a couple of those wells. And I'll never forget, I've got a picture still framed, the day that our drilling engineer went out and manually tested those wells, and they're coming back great. And he called and said, I think we're onto something here. And that was the day.
Oh, thank God.
Okay, maybe this is going to work. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 snowy owls. I don't know if we can talk about this.
Yeah.
There were 2 snowy owls that had a nest right by one of those locations. And later, the First Nations people in the area told us that's a sign of good luck.
Oh.
So we think we had a little bit of luck on our side, too. Yeah.
But the wells came in 5 times what our minimum threshold was to be commercial.
Wow.
And that's when we said,
So you really went from bankruptcy to boom in months with that change.
And we had been doing okay before then, just of no scale, though. We had a relationship in these shallow gas assets that we talked about. We had bought some assets there, but that was minor. And, the other thing that I think is interesting about that is how that success there, parlayed itself into future serial entrepreneurial, opportunities. We ultimately sold that company. It was very easy to raise money for the next company we wanted to do.
Because you've done it?
Because we had success.
Yep.
Yeah. If you do it and have failure, different story.
Yeah.
And, really, I think it gives you that opportunity that if you want to go forward and do those sort of things. The other thing I just want to mention, too, that I think was important, part of our success is that we had moved to Canada. If we had tried to do this out of Houston, we would have never gotten the deals done. There was a fundamental gaining of trust when you move, you quit your job, you move to that community and say, I'm going to be part of this community now. Mm-hmm. And I think being local to your operations is extraordinarily important.
Being able to kind of touch it and feel it.
Well, and interact with everybody else in that community. You become part of that community family.
You're not a carpetbagger anymore. Yeah. You're here to stay. Like I'm now a Canadian citizen. I married a Canadian. I'm trying to get her green card next week to come back and stay here in the States. But I think us becoming part of the community meant a lot to them. And it taught us a lot because Canada is a different country. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of Americans have a warm feeling about Canada, but they don't appreciate a lot of the subtleties that exist in that nation that are very important when you're doing business and interacting with people. You really need to learn which buttons to push and not to push.
So what was the biggest culture shock, when out of that, besides the holiday thing, right?
Well, the work ethic is different. That's the first time we came from an environment where work, weekends. Up there, not so much. You got to give people time off. They don't have that expectation. And they work hard, but I think it taught us maybe we can be more efficient and maybe we can try to avoid wasting that energy unnecessarily and be a little more prepared and organized so we don't have to do those things. Or if we do, don't do them terribly often. But I think at the end of the day, the quality of life aspiration up there is a little stronger than it is here. Not to say people don't have great quality of life here, but up there, it's more like a European culture. They definitely place way up there. Like when women get pregnant, they're going to have a baby, they get a year off.
Whoa.
And that's just part of the deal. You know, the company helps pay for it. The government subsidizes it, but that's what you do. And the husband and the wife have the option to take that time off.
Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting. When we first got up there, before we were working every day, I'm in the grocery store with Joan and the kids, and she's like, look at that. And I said, what are you talking about? Look at all the men in here in the middle of the day. And there's a different work-life balance mentality up there. And listen, we're moving there, raising kids there. We lived there 9 years. Great experience from a family standpoint. If my wife's family had lived locally, we would still be there, you know, but we moved back just to get closer to her family at the end of the day.
So you obviously know what it's like to create a business out of nothing, to grow it fast and to exit it. But then you became a serial entrepreneur. You said, okay, well, I'm not gonna go play golf for the next 50 years. What are we gonna do? So you started other companies, you grew them. What's the hardest thing that you guys think about growing a company rapidly? We talked about capital, but let's assume that you've got the capital backing. What other challenges?
I think the skill sets that are inherent of those that start successful companies are different than the skill sets you need to grow a successful company.
Oh, let's talk about that.
One of the things we did that I think is very healthy that can help in this, we started having an annual retreat offsite on year one, even when it was just Mike and I. I mean, we're around each other 8 hours a day, and now we're going to go spend a couple of days, just the two of us, on an offsite retreat.
Yeah.
And in those retreats, as we grew, we would get our managers in there and get more people. We started hiring facilitators to help us plan and conduct the retreats. You have to be aware of the limitation of your skill sets and realize, when do I need to start hiring people to do things that just aren't my thing? And, you know, when you're starting a company, you have vision, you're a leader, you're willing to take risks. I call it, it's funny, people can't believe the risks I take. And I say, go watch me play golf. I'm not a risk taker. I think you have to mitigate risk and understand how to mitigate risk. And, you know, when you think about those things, I just think there's very few people that transition well from starting a company to being a 500-person company or a 1,000-person company. Our first company, we sold it. We had about 135 full-time employees and 175 full-time contractors.
Wow.
And we were drilling 400 wells a year in coal bed methane, which actually at the time, I think, went from a well count, little dinky wells, but I think we were the 5th or 6th largest driller in Canada at the time.
Wow.
And, you know, it's just you have to be aware, and find a good board of directors that can give you guidance. Don't just get your buddies. Get people who are going to question you and challenge you. You need to be smart and, you know, seek that outside advice. Always be in charge of your vision. Never give it over to somebody else. Keep the passion. But realize, and listen, I think our company was easy to manage when we were 20 people and less. Like, we'd all go camping together with our families and things like that. It's when we started. I'll never forget, Brown, we had gotten to be 2 floors in a building. Brown's walking around a new hire. My wife is working there in the payroll department. And Brown's telling me, he goes, hey, I'm walking this guy around. Introduced him to Joan and said, well, this is George's wife. And the guy goes, who's George? Oh. And he goes, we've gotten too big.
Yeah.
And, but I think we did well in transitioning into having a good board. Our outside backer had a larger company. Ultimately,
so did they help like provide some of that structure? Because that's a lot. Yes. That's a lot of great ideas, but a lot of that seems like bigger business type stuff. We
partially sold after about 3 years, and so we still ran everything. But now we were getting good advice on legal, HR, marketing.
good advice that has to be at least listened to. Maybe not followed, but you better listen to it.
And we learned a lot. I think the first key outside experts that we brought in were the landman was a woman that was a landman, and then the guy that was our first controller. And they really helped add a lot of value because those are skill sets we didn't have. And we didn't fully appreciate how much that helped, but it really opened up opportunities to then allow us to do the things we do. But the landman opened doors that we couldn't open. And then the controller helped us dot the I's and cross the T's. And
translate financials and operations and how does one impact the other?
Yeah.
See, we're not just a bunch of accounting nerds. We have use.
I disagree.
But one thing that I like I was up in Canada this summer. And when I was there, we had a little MGV Energy reunion. A lot of our former employees came together. We had a big party. And about 5 or 6 of our former employees have been very successful starting their own businesses. And they made a point out of coming up and talking to me about that. In fact, one of them paid for the event out of the proceeds of his recent big transaction. But I felt like the kind of culture that we created there gave people a chance to see how this worked, and at least in a few cases, inspired them to try that themselves, and they've been successful at it. So, that makes you feel pretty good.
And I want to add to that. One of the things I think we've always taken a win-win attitude, not just with our joint venture partners, our board, but with our employees. It's funny, we've had some conflicts in the past, not between us, but with some of the folks that we were reporting to later. Is an employee an asset or a liability? And I think we've always treated employees as assets. And towards that end, in these retreats, the first part of our retreat had nothing to do with the company. We would sit down with our managers and say, what do you want out of life? Where do you want to be in 5 years and 10 years? And because if we don't know that, then how do I help you as your boss to be even aware of that? We fired very few people, and we rarely had to place ads to hire people. So people wanted to work for us. And even today, so we're 18 years later, our employees hold a reunion every year in Calgary.
No kidding.
Whether we're there or not.
Yeah.
Well, if we're not there, they have a picture of us. They hope.
Yeah.
That's a tribute to amazing culture, honestly. I mean,
But that win-win thing, I think that was a big thing. And it was also true with our counterparties. If we were negotiating a business deal with a third party, we don't want to do a deal that's great for us and terrible for them, because it's not going to be a successful deal. And I think that surprised people sometimes when we would actually offer terms or offer things that were more beneficial to them than us, but it was our goal to have a successful deal.
Yeah.
And for that deal to be successful, they had to be successful. And that was important to us. And I think people picked up on that. I'll tell you another thing, some of the stuff that I wanted to say that you brought up. 2 of our mentors were professors at A&M, Dick Morris and Steve Holditch. And both of them gave us a lot of advice, but there's 2 things that they used to say that we get a kick out of and we repeat a lot. Dick used to say, hurry every chance you get. And in the entrepreneurial world, that's certainly for sure the case. And with Steve, I reserve the right to get smarter. If you're wrong, get over it. You're wrong, figure it out, be smarter next time, and don't destroy yourself. Don't let that tear you down. So you can make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Don't let that tear you up. Just get over it and get on with it.
And what did Dick? It's RONG wrong.
Yeah. RONG wrong. Yeah.
Well, how about that, Ags? Was that pretty awesome or what? I know that was a fire interview.
God, so much fun.
It was so much fun. And I think that we should probably hold our takeaways off until the very end. So, I know that I've got pages, plural, with a note, with notes that I took from that. And it was just absolutely amazing. But George and Mike are pretty awesome Ags and very good business people. So it's really cool to be able to sit down with them.
It truly is like a masterclass and is so awesome. So make sure that you join us next week when we finish up this conversation. But for now, that's going to wrap up this episode of Aggie Growth Hacks. So we hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that kind of whet your appetite to hear these masterclasses. And Ags, we've got 7 more solid weeks of in-person interviews with Aggie 100 winners. If you're not connected with Aggie Growth Hacks on whatever podcast or whatever social media platform you're seeing this on, connect with us. We'd love to get to know you. We'd love to share your story and connect you with other Ags.
We also want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship at Texas A&M University. Since 1999, the McFerrin Center for Entrepreneurship has served as the hub of entrepreneurship at Texas A&M. If you're an Aggie entrepreneur or even a wantrepreneur, head on over to their website right now to find a program that's right for you. Just go to aggiegrowthhacks.com/McFerrin. Well, Ags, join us next time when we connect with another great Aggie entrepreneur. In this case, it's going to be Mike and George. And let's learn how they hack their growth. Until then, I'm Chris Hunter.
And I'm Greg Martin. Thanks and gig 'em.